I'm thrilled to have with us Collin Stewart. Now, Collin is the co-founder and the co-CEO of Predictable Revenue and host of the Predictable Revenue podcast, which is one of our favorite podcasts. We love listening to it. Welcome, Collin.
Thanks, Tom.
Good to have you here, man. So why don't we just jump right in? So for some of you out there listening, and I know when we're doing sales training, this is a big thing for people, is actually qualifying leads properly. Because most people, when they approach us, they go, hey, can you help us increase our closing rate? Or we're struggling with putting deals over the line. And I go, okay, well, we can talk about closing, but maybe you're trying to close deals that just aren't well qualified to begin with.
100%. Because it's all about this, like part of it is about the source. Part of it's about the execution on that lead. It's one of those things, like you can use BANT, you can use MEDDIC. And this is a much deeper conversation on, getting into forecasting and what your sales stages look like. The only thing I'll say, because we could go into a whole other episode about that, I think just pick the things that are most critical for your business to see a deal moving forward, and then make sure that your sales stages actually make sense. Right. Like we brought on a new sales manager 3-4 months ago now, and he's doing a great job. He came from a great company, super highly recommended. And we were having a conversation about, because I'd heard him say a couple of things where I'm like, oh, he doesn't sound super confident in the forecast. Right. And we were using MEDDIC. We had somebody on my podcast where she taught us about how to forecast within 1%, and she's doing $500 million.
Yeah, from Zendesk.
Yeah, Jamie.
And actually, they're one of our customers in APAC.
Right. Yeah. Great company. Jamie Buss. It was an amazing episode.
Love that one. Yeah.
So I went and I took that and I internalized that.
And in fact, she modified it from MEDDIC to MEDDPIC.
MEDDPIC.
Yeah. So, you play around, and some have MEDDIC with 1 C, some have it with 2 Cs.
Exactly. You got to personalize it to yourself.
Right.
But I noticed that he had this, when I hear him, he's saying, oh, well, so-and-so thinks they're going to close this. So-and-so thinks they're going to close that. And I'm like, well, this doesn't sound like a guy who's confident that we're going to close this, and here's why. And what we diagnosed, when I sat down and had a conversation, it turned out that the issue was he was following MEDDIC, right? And we've got the MEDDIC built into our Salesforce, so you can see the MEDDIC score. Nice. And he was just kind of looking at the MEDDIC score and saying, okay, well, does the rep have a strong MEDDIC score? But it's not just about the MEDDIC score. It's the dance, right? It's the dance of the qualification, your qualification criteria and your sales stages. Right. And I think the magic with Jamie that I realized on the podcast, and I don't know if you can see my face, but I just like my soul is getting destroyed when it comes to, I'm realizing I've never used sales stages properly, because she talked about having a customer verifiable outcome to move from one stage to the next. Yes. And the customer verifiable outcome plus the subjective qualification
Now
framework.
Let's just pause this, because see, Collin and I, we're speaking the same language, right? But not everybody listening is going to, customer verifiable outcome. What does that mean? Yeah. So it's basically, let's break it down. Rather than, I scheduled a qualifying call, they scheduled the qualifying call. They booked the time in my Calendly, like, for example, or, rather than I sent them a brochure, they confirmed that they went through the brochure, right? Or they introduced me to someone, or they did this, they did that. So it's not the behavior of the sales rep exclusively, it's the behavior of that prospect or the customer. What did they do? And those give you more clues as to where they are in terms of their decision-making process or, favorability, right?
Yeah, I think ours are like customer showed up to the first call, customer showed up to the discovery call, right? Customer brought the all the correct stakeholders to the follow-up call, right? And then we have one sort of subjective one, and that's the rep can clearly articulate why do nothing is off the table. All right. And that's the bar, right? If you have if you've got a high MEDDIC score that you can defend, and you can clearly articulate why do nothing is off the table, right? That's an opportunity that's going to close.
And in a moment, we're going to break down what MEDDIC is in terms of the acronym, right? But I love that thing that you were talking about, Collin, about, do nothing is not an option, right? Do nothing is off the table. So what does that mean? It's this buyer identified pain, right? Like the buyer is like, we have to do something. Now, it may not be with you.
Absolutely.
But we have to do something. Well, why is that? Well, if we don't do X, Y will happen. So it's basically like old school. It's asking like a consequence question, right? Like, what will happen if you don't make this change? What will happen if you don't change to this new technology, et cetera, et cetera? And if that pain is strong enough and they're like, we absolutely have to do something, well, then this is really qualifying, right?
100%.
But if they're like, well, to be honest with you, Collin, if we don't do it, won't be the end of the world. It's kind of a nice to have, but not a need to have. Well, then obviously that MEDDIC score is going to go down.
100%. Or the MEDDIC score might stay the same, but you're never going to get past that certain stage where the customer, where the rep can clearly articulate that do nothing's off the table.
Right. Well, because the I in MEDDIC is identified pain. So if they haven't identified a pain, and I guess maybe we have to be subjective as to how painful the pain is, right?
Well, that's the dance of, there's on the MEDDIC side, there's the identified pain, which is like, this is the quality of the pain. This is the right. This is the qualitative metric. Right.
This is how much we're losing every month by not doing this, or this is right.
Yeah, it's the way that the buyer would describe the pain, and then there's the metric, which is the qualitative side of things.
So that's the M in MEDDIC is metrics, right?
Exactly, and really it's those two, economic buyer, that are the sort of the most three that are sort of the three that are most important. Right. So when I'm doing a sort of qualification call with my reps to make sure they're following the process and to see if a deal is actually where we think it is, it's those three, right? It's metric. Do you understand the impact that this is going to have on their business? The identified pain, can you really articulate what it is? Right. And then the economic buyer, have we had a conversation with the economic buyer? And if you've got those three, and the fourth one is you can articulate why do nothing is off the table, whether it's with us or not. Right. It's like, I know this company's going to do something. Right. Now we just got to work on making sure that we win it.
This is a solid, real opportunity.
Exactly.
Now let's friggin' close it.
As opposed to fairy dust. Whereas like I've looked at my pipelines before my entire life and I'm like, I don't know.
I know. It's
a big old shrug. And you've got forecasting software and you can do this and you can do the math and you can.
But it's so subjective, right? And it's sort of like, I find, sales reps, we're awesome, right? Like we're so great.
We're the best.
Like we're the best. We're smiling. We think we're great. we're super optimistic, right? Yeah. And that's beautiful because we need that optimism. But often it's kind of like a false hope because we're just like, look at my pipeline. And you're just like, yeah, it's looking pretty good.
Even as a rep, you have these rose colored glasses about, I feel like it's going to close and here's why. But it was implementing this sort of, this methodology, this structure, the formalizing of the process that helped me step away from like, yeah, my gut, I think it's going to close. And then gave me the right set of questions, not just to ask my reps, but to ask myself. And I think that was the most important piece about maturing.
So we've done that in our CRM as well. We've got these, questions and stages, steps rather within the stages. And it's just check boxes.
Yeah.
Have you done this? Have they done that? And only until all those check boxes are ticked do we now move that from a new opportunity to a working opportunity, from working to closing, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Right. So, we've got the metrics, we've got, economic buyer. The first D is kind of the decision-making process, right? So do we understand the decision-making process? The other D, if I'm not wrong, was
decision criteria.
The decision criteria. So do we know what is the criteria with which they will make that decision? And do we fit that criteria?
Yeah.
Even better, have we maybe helped that prospect frame the criteria?
Absolutely.
That's like gold, right?
That's one of those that our reps sort of not struggle with, but they weren't doing previously, right? Because it's an awkward question. It can be an awkward question to ask. So what's important to you? But at the same time, it's obviously one of those most important pieces. But making sure, and we're having that conversation, but when you have it in your CRM system that says, hey, you need to be able to articulate to your sales manager after this call what's most important. You're going to ask those questions a little bit differently, and that's going to have a huge impact on your sales process.
I love that, Collin. I remember listening to one of the guests on your podcast who said something like, it's probably from Lessonly.
Okay.
If you can explain your customer's pain better than they can, if you can explain their problem, their challenges better than they can, now you're rocking and rolling.
Now you're
okay.
Cooking.
I love that. Okay, that's cool, right? So then you got and then the P was the
process.
The paperwork.
Yeah.
The paperwork process. So do you have to be set up as an approved vendor? Is there any NDAs you have to sign? Just kind of get your paperwork in order. The I was identified pain. C was kind of the competitors. Like what's the competitive landscape? Who else are you up against? And then the second C was the champion.
Exactly.
Do you have an internal champion lobbying for you, advocating for you within that client organization? You got that. That's awesome. So you guys use MEDDIC. So my understanding was typically MEDDIC is kind of for like, bigger deals with a very long buying process, a long, complicated cycle, right?
Yeah.
But for many of our listeners out there, if you're a small business owner and you're dealing with like SMEs or SMBs, or you're, an insurance agent, for example, listening, right? You might use like BANT as a basic framework.
100%.
Are you constantly amazed at how few sales reps even know what we're talking about when we say BANT?
Yeah, I mean, there's no class in, or there aren't too many sales classes or courses in university. So if you're hiring right at a university, where are they going to learn that?
Right.
Yeah.
So BANT is just, budget, authority, need, and timeline. And very few people ask prospects those questions, right? And it doesn't have to be in that order. Everyone gets all messed up. Oh, Tom, should I ask about budget right away? I'm like, well, it's just a nice acronym that you can phonetically say, right? But you kind of figure it out. Do they have a budget, right? What is it? Have they bought before, similar expenditure, or what are they looking at, et cetera? Authority, are you dealing with someone with decision-making authority? Is there that buyer identified need or pain? And then what's the time frame that they're looking at? So do more qualifying.